News and views of myself, Salailo Makwidiri. The time is 2 minutes before the top of the hour, 9 a.m. Central African time. And we're going to be switching gears now to another concerning state of affairs. South Africans should be bracing themselves for yet another shock from Eskom. A secret 54 billion tariff deal has just been revealed. And this is a result of a major regulatory blunder by NERSA and NERSA, the energy regulator, and it simply means electricity prices won't just rise by the expected 5.35% next year, as it was announced, but they will rise by nearly 9% in 2026 and again in 2027. And I think we can all agree that electricity prices have been quite hefty in the last few years. And it's grim news for households across South Africa that are already buckling under rising living costs. And for the Reserve Bank in itself, inflation target of 3%. Critics are saying the secrecy around the deal shows Eskom and its regulator are out of touch with the reality facing ordinary South Africans. So we asked the question this morning, can the country really afford this? Can you afford a 9% increase in electricity prices 2 years in a row? And to help us to unpack how we ultimately got here and the numbers and the impact this will have, we're joined by a good friend of the show and energy expert, Mohamed Madhi. Mohamed, assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah so much for joining us. A very good morning and welcome.
Walaikum salam. Good to be here.
No, the pleasure is all ours. I think we can kickstart the conversation with the basics, in the simplest of form. What exactly is going on here? What went wrong? How did a regulatory body miscalculation end up costing South Africans more than 54 billion rand?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it does point to the fact that the internal processes within NERSA are not as effective as they should be. Certainly not enough controls before an important decision like this that has an impact and an effect on the whole economy. You would assume that it's checked and double checked and triple checked, and there's a committee that the board that probably sits beforehand and approves all of this. Now, something broke down internally in NERSA, but unfortunately, the bad news is actually worse than we think. So, in the past, when we've had an increase 1 year and then a projection of what the likely increase is going to be in the second and the third years, that has never ever happened that way. It's always happened that by the time the second year comes, Eskom asks for more, and inevitably they get more. And a good example of this is, 3 years ago we had 18%, then we had 12.7% last year, and 12.7% increase this year. So the most likely scenario was next year we were going to have around 11 or 12% increase. The worrying thing with this blunder that's happened is that increase may go up more than 12, 13, 14%. So this is actually the really big problem for South Africa, and we just have to look at the history. The facts of the increases up to now bear this out.
And now, a very, very concerning state of affairs. Why was this deal kept secret, and what does it tell us about NERSA and Eskom's transparency when it comes to letting South Africans know about what's happening internally and ultimately how they'll be affected from miscalculations like this one?
Yeah, so I think, look, we probably just need to step back a little bit and understand that this is one error that NERSA has made, a very important, very consequential error. But certainly, as a regulator, they have been doing fairly well in terms of the kinds of policy that has been coming out. So the execution of that policy has always been a problem for NERSA. And we must just separate those two issues. South Africa has a fantastic and very liberalized electricity regime, but the execution is where we fall flat. And unfortunately, this is another example of that within NERSA. The other issue, which is a wider problem, is that we don't have the strict barriers between NERSA and Eskom and the Minister of Electricity and government in general. They tend to cooperate where at times they are not supposed to cooperate. They're supposed to put the interests of the public first and present a position to one another. So NERSA is the regulator. It shouldn't be cozying up to Eskom. When something like this happens, the public needs to know about it immediately. the fact that Eskom may challenge it and, all kinds of legal ramifications has no impact for a national body like NERSA, a regulator that should place the interests of the public first. And this is a matter of the interests of the public. It should, the minute it was known, it should be publicized, and they should come clean, completely clean in terms of what happened, why it happened, and how this is not going to happen again. But more importantly, how that impact is going to be cushioned going forward.
Mm, mm. For many South Africans, this almost feels like a deja vu kind of moment. It's endless bailouts, by government to Eskom. It's these endless electricity hikes. Why has Eskom become such a consistent drag on the economy? And are we ever going to get to a point where electricity is affordable for all South Africans? The infrastructure is well taken care of, and people can afford to get the basic electricity at a price that they can afford. How much longer do South Africans have to keep up with this?
Look, unfortunately, if the current state of affairs continue, then we're going to have high increases for the foreseeable future, the next 5-10 years. What needs to change is Eskom's role in the whole electricity industry in the country. And if you ask the reason why this happens, why do we have these increasing prices at such a rate? The answer, unfortunately, is very simple, but it encapsulates a lot of issues that have happened up to now. And the answer is that Eskom's cost base is increasing, and it increases every year. Its debt burden is extremely high, so it carries a very high interest burden as well. On the other hand, Eskom's customer base, so its revenue, is shrinking because a number of customers are moving to alternatives. Today, we have viable alternatives, and there are many, many companies providing viable alternatives to Eskom. So with a shrinking revenue base and an increasing cost base, it doesn't take a genius to understand that this is not a viable business in the long term. And the sooner government and everybody else realizes this, the better, and we can restructure Eskom in a way that makes it more viable, but that also doesn't hold the country hostage. This is really important. What we're doing instead is the reverse. We are putting our heads in the sand, assuming that Eskom is going to solve all the problems, and just allowing Eskom these enormous electricity hikes, which is not sustainable for the country.
No, very, very concerning. I have a question here from one of our listeners. They're asking, how does South Africa's power pricing compare internationally, and what does that mean for competitiveness and investment?
Yeah, it's a great question. And just some very, very quick history. Back in the late 90s, when I used to be a power station engineer, we had some of the cheapest tariffs in the world. And this made us very competitive, and this spurred on a lot of industry. We had fantastic growth for a number of years. Today, relative to our peers, and you have to always manage it relative to your peers, our electricity prices are pretty high, extremely high. Still not the highest in the world, but for the higher echelons of the developing world, our electricity prices are extremely high. So we've gone to one of the cheapest in the world to now relatively high electricity prices. And this, of course, has put dampener on a number of investments into this country, on the mining industry in this country, on many other sectors that used to underpin this economy. So lower electricity costs are absolutely vital to this country. We cannot only take the interests of, we have to consider the workers at Eskom, but that's, 30, 40,000 people compared to the millions that suffer as a result of these high electricity prices.
No, very, very concerning state of affairs. One last question before I let you go, Mohamed. What do South Africans do now? The new reality is that electricity is becoming increasingly expensive. People are asking, what do I do? I know families that had to cut down on groceries so that they can afford electricity. What do people do in this scary state of affairs that we find ourselves in?
I think one has to prioritize alternative energy, because the investment in alternative energy, provides a solid base for families and for businesses. So moving to grid independence, At the moment, it's not possible for everybody, but
Mm.
if you say if you can get to 20% and then 50% over a couple of years, and then 100% grid independence in 3 or 5 years' time, that must be the plan. And this must actually be part of the financial planning of every business and every family going forward.
No, most definitely. Mohammed, Jazakallah so much for joining us. Always a pleasure. Really appreciate you giving us your time and your insights.
Shukran, appreciate it.
There you go. That was energy expert Mohamed Madhi on Eskom's secret 54 billion tariff deal, which once again requires you as a South African being asked to pay more. So from next year and the year after, there's going to be significant increases in electricity prices that are already soaring high. And yeah, it's a concerning state of affairs. And yeah, let's give each other tips. What are you doing to save up on electricity? If you can't afford to go completely off the grid, completely, from relying from Eskom, what have you done? What steps have you put in place to make sure that, your electricity prices, your electricity bill at the end of the month is not as much as it would be, considering just how expensive it has become? Are you switching to gas? I know I can see a lot of people have now started using gas as an alternative, gas stoves, gas heaters. That has become a new thing. There's even powered, gas powered, lights and all of the stuff. But people are finding alternatives. Solar is another big one. Solar panels, the solar geysers that people are also using. What have you changed? Where have you had to tweak to make sure that you cut down on electricity prices, and make sure that you're not as reliant on Eskom as traditionally you were over the years? You can engage with us. Our number is 0116800355. On WhatsApp is 0617660355. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, News and Views continues.